Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer and Michael Wann is with me, and this is Project Kids Excellent Adventure number 3. And I want to, before we get started, thank everybody for all the really awesome feedback we're receiving on this. Michael, I don't know if you know yet that we've been receiving awesome feedback. People really like this. I had a lot of people reach out and say so, both privately and in comment sections after the last one. So excellent. People are starting to sort of, chime in and say things and whatnot, which is what we hope for. And I'm really glad everyone's enjoying this. So we're going to keep, kind of doing, when I say more of the same, I don't mean repeating the same things, but this is the path that we're going to go down, this path of mirroring inner exploration, outer exploration, discussing our experiences and inviting people to join in. So anyway, that was all really cool. And Michael, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. And I like hearing the good feedback. For better, for worse, I put stuff out on the internet, but there's this part of me, once that happens, I don't want to then ever look at it again.
Mm-hmm.
I still can't, I find it uncomfortable hearing my own voice. We lock up.
Hold on, you froze up for just a second.
Are we good now?
I think we're good now. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just like the normal thing, when we hear our own voice, we hear our inner voice, we don't know what it sounds like, if it were recorded and then coming back. So it always sounds strange. And some people, I suppose, never get over that. Mm-hmm. And I would be one of those people. So it's I don't, once something's done, I don't look. And so there's part of me, I suppose, that wonders, I wonder if anyone's listening. I wonder if they're enjoying this. So I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah. I think it's actually an important part of sanity not to look back. It's interesting. I see that some people, some content creators, are constantly engaging and involved with their audience, and others, including many people that you and I, but probably both, some of us know or like and respect as their work and whatnot. They said no. They just, once they do something, they put it down and that's it. They don't look back at it again. They don't, other than if maybe they get asked about it in an interview or whatever, but they don't check the comments. They don't interact in the comment section, and it isn't because they aren't curious about what people think or don't want to interact, but it's one of those things that it does sometimes, it can have the effects possibly of altering what you might otherwise say.
Yes, very much that, and it takes away some of the spontaneity of what we're trying to encourage in this conversation, because when you start to see, it's a funny dance of when that there's, when you're in the Truman Show, there are people watching you, and you want to go and be real. You want it to be reality TV, but then as soon as you start seeing well, this is what the focus group is saying. We like to see this or that, and then it kind of loses some of that authenticity. And so to be true to the authenticity, and I think that's an inner feeling that's part of not wanting to go back and look. And so to keep the inner authenticity is not to look at it. But then on the flip side, you're right. It's you do want to engage, and you don't want it to seem that there's not an appreciation or an interest, because this is a collective thing which we're doing right now.
Absolutely. No, I think I just kind of use my intuition as guide. Sometimes I look and sometimes I don't. And as soon as I get that little voice in my head that says, stop looking now, I don't go back again, and I'm very, one of the things that I've noticed is since I started creating content and being in the alternative media, I have greatly reduced the amount of media that I consume. Mm-hmm. I used to listen to, there was times in my life when I was probably listening to 12 to 16 hours of information or podcasts or reading articles a day. And now it's way less than that. And part of it is just because I'm busier, but the other part is because I want to be clear on what my thoughts are on things. And I do still listen to some because I think other people have things to say that are
right.
Oftentimes just more important, and I want to take those things in sometimes and respond to them or sharpen my thinking with them. But I also at a certain point you recognize, especially if you're someone like you or I who isn't just reporting the news or critiquing the news or whatever, right, that okay, my quality here is that I bring a unique perspective, or I have a unique way of thinking about things and whatnot. And so that needs, it's just kind of like an artist who has their own style, right?
Right,
All
right.
the teachers always said, oh, you should do it more like this person or more like that person, but then they wouldn't be themselves. And so there's that aspect. There's that aspect of it. And then the other thing is like when I, especially, and this goes to something that I might want to talk about a little bit today, there are certain people that for me are like, I don't want to say that their content is better than others because that's not what I mean, but they're heavy hitters for me in terms of like, and I say that you qualify, you're in this group, and the other person that maybe we'll talk about for a few minutes today is also, but they have their own style of thinking of things that is different than mine, but similar in terms of the kind of thing it is, right? And so when I listen to their stuff, like I don't even listen to usually whole things they do anymore. I'll listen to a few minutes here or there just to get an idea of what they're talking about. And then I want to be able to bring my own unique perspective to this and not like regurgitate theirs in some way. So I want to see what they're doing because I feel like we're from the same class, the same classroom. Like we each have our little thing we do, but we kind of are doing the same thing, but doing it differently. We each have our own style and I don't want to take on theirs or them to take on mine and whatever. So it's like, I do it like kind of having, like when you just taste the fine, you don't drink fine wine every day, right? When you have it, it's an occasion, you have a small glass of it generally, and then you think about it for a long time. Right? Or you enjoy it or you remember it for a long time. It isn't just like, oh, just more stuff in and more stuff out, you know? And so like there are certain people that I listen a little bit, I really take it in and then I turn it off, not because I don't think it's good or important, but because in some ways, because it's good and important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. And I think that they're, it's funny because I am on the same sort of trajectory as you just described of like at one point, like so much consumption of information. There was like a period in my life where like I could not put enough stuff in my head. And like now it's completely the opposite. I'm really becoming sensitive to like just being in front of the computer and being on the phone. I've always been aware, but I think that sensitivity has increased even more so. So I'm like, I don't even want to go and and I want to be as little in front of the computer as I possibly can. But what I'm also doing now, or I'm finding myself, not like purposefully, this just like naturally came up, is like I'm rereading a lot of things I read 5-7 years ago. And reconnecting with books. Like books used to be, when I first got into like conspiracy, I remember what my thing used to be like. It was like a lot of podcasts. It was when my youngest son was little, and I would just like strap him down on like a newborn on my chest, and I would walk for an hour and just listen to a podcast. Like I know that he's like energetically connected to all this sort of stuff. And then at night I would find something. I used to really one of the first people I used to listen to a lot was Alan Watt from Cutting Through the Matrix.
Yep.
Like that dude, like in 2007, 2008, like that was like one of my primary places. And I would just like print out his stuff and I'd read 30 pages of printouts because I didn't want to have it on the computer. And I would do books then. And like, and I had this really nice relationship at that time with consuming information through like reading something which I'm touching in my hands, like a book and a piece of paper. And I got away from that and like got sucked into like all of like there's so much information we get through YouTube and through like other videos, and going back to the reading, like and particularly stuff which I have some degree of familiarity because I can reflect upon where I was the last time I read this. I'm finding that really beneficial, like, and really grounding, like mentally, because if we're always like expanding our thoughts, like more, like you said, like more in, more out, but like now we're like coming back and we're looking at it again and refining some of those ideas more and more as we have more experience and more wisdom. That to me has been very satisfying. It's been very satisfying.
Yeah, interesting that you said that about the books too. That's something for me, like just in the past year, a little over a year, I've started really getting into books again. I used to read a lot when I was younger, and then when I first started getting into the alternative media, I did a lot of research that involved looking at a lot of documents, printing a lot of articles, reading them. I also didn't like it too much on the computer. If it was important, I'd print it out, all that kind of stuff. And then at some point, I also got sucked into just consuming everything through YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever. And at a certain point, that worked for me. It happened at a time when I wasn't very busy, but then it kind of bled over to when I started to get really busy and I had to multitask, right? So you can listen to a podcast while you're exercising or while you're driving in the car or, whatnot, where it's harder to you can't read while you're driving,
Right.
So, I've seen it before. I've seen people trying to read while they're driving, but, I knew somebody who used to walk and read, but I run. You can't really exactly run and read. Not very well anyway. So I got into that too. And then just in the last year and a half or so, I'm reading a lot more books. I'm actually thinking about with the Off Planet Media patrons and stuff starting like a book club, you know what I mean? So we can read stuff and discuss it, kind of thing, or just because I think for that reason, to get people back at looking at, the written word. And not that there isn't some level of mind control in that too, but it isn't nearly as much as what comes through when we consume our media digitally,
Mm-hmm.
actually looking at the book. And the book, I mean the book, I don't mean the Kindle. Let's look at the book. Kindle is a book burning app. Let's all
Right.
right. I mean the book. But I agree with you. I like to revisit some old things that I read. It's interesting. Whoop. There we had a little interference for a sec. It's interesting to revisit something that had a big effect on you at one time in your life, and then to come back at it with all this new sets of knowledge and experience that you've had since then, and see see how you feel about it then. And then also I think that reading is just, there's something completely different about taking in the information that way. You know what I mean? I used to love getting lost in a book when I was little. You can't quite get lost in a podcast the same way. I mean, I've seen people get lost listening to podcasts, but it's not the same. It's a different kind of thing I'm talking about,
Yeah, well, I mean, it just makes sense. You're using a different part of your brain, like your eyes versus your ears. And so, of course, you're going to receive it and it's going to be a different way. I mean, I think about this all the time, when you get into language and you think about the actual language we use and that being the programming of our brain computer. And then you think about the shape, when you get into the real esoteric, the shape of letters and what they represent, how when letters were first designed, or whomever, whatever designed them. And then the whole idea of I think about Hebrew, right? You read from right to left instead of left to right. What is that doing to the consciousness? I don't know what that is, but I know it has to be different. Just if you're right hand dominant versus left hand dominant, it's changing consciousness. And we've talked about this before. We know we're in front of this computer and you and I are talking about good stuff, but there's still the potentiality of the technology affecting our nervous system because they know how to do that. They're carrier waves. Funny enough, we talked about this last time, side note, we talked about Lily waves, right?
Yeah.
And the book, which I was revisiting, we talked a little bit about this 2 weeks ago. I was reading Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. And the exact page, which I had my bookmark on, was the page about John Lilly. There's nothing about Lily waves. It was talking about him and all of the research he did in mind control.
Yeah.
And it's so neat for me to go and read this Robert Anton Wilson stuff. And I'm poking holes in a way which I wasn't poking holes 7 years ago. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. And that's one of the cool things about the reading something a second time. Is you can be a little bit more critical and refined in terms of what we were talking about before of not consuming too much information. Is we can, instead of getting into the habit of hearing so much and then just repeating what we've heard, particularly from people who are good at at positioning ideas and arguments, that that can be limiting. Like the skill set of being a good orator, the skill set of being a good debater, really does not necessarily tie in directly to whether or not it's a good idea, or like, it's just like the skill set is, I know how to position it, I know how to outlogic. And so I always think about that too. Like, you get caught, you get lost in something, you're like, wow, this person's like really, really mesmerizing, and you get sucked in, even if you're trying to be critical. So I think, myself included, everyone should be critical of anything I say. I'm critical of myself, and that's part of what we're doing right now. At least I hope we are, is like beginning to really become very, very savvy with all of the overload of information, which is who was the guy who said it, the CIA head who said, we know our disinformation is complete when no one knows what's true or false?
I think it's Anton Wilson. Our disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American people believe is a lie.
Exactly. And so it's like, when you think about that, it's like everything out there has, like, if you're going to be open-minded, you could poke holes both ways. Be like, well, that makes sense, but that doesn't make sense. And that just requires, like, if you're trying to at least navigate that you have to become more critical in terms of how you're analyzing what information you are choosing to consume.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was Anton Wilson, but I'm not sure. One of my friends has that as like the quote at the bottom of all their emails.
Right.
No, I may have. I can't.
It was.
Whatever. It was someone.
I know it wasn't Dulles. Because okay. Dulles was 50s, and this quote was from the 80s.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah,
but it was the director of the CIA. Like, they're all, it's all in the same. It's all in the same club.
Absolutely. And as to what you were saying, Robert Anton Wilson is a great kind of case study in some of this stuff, because I read Cosmic Trigger recently, and that was the first book I've ever read by Robert Anton Wilson. But I've heard about Robert Anton Wilson for years and years through different ways, right? And he's kind of interesting, because you read him and you get to know this guy, you get to like this guy, and there's something about him. He's had a lot of loss in his life. You know what I mean? He had obviously some health issues and things like that. So this guy, on a certain level, you're feeling like, okay, I like this person, and this person is genuine, and he's being genuine in the questions he's asking, or the curiosities he's having, right? And so, like, particularly in Cosmic Trigger, you recognize, and I guess he refers in Cosmic Trigger a lot to this sort of Illuminati trilogy book that he had written prior to that.
I've read it.
You start to recognize that, oh, this thing that we're doing has been being done for a long time. And a lot of people have been asking the same questions. So we like to think we're like in this new place, right? Where people are poking holes in reality and discovering things that haven't been noticed or discussed before. It's not true. We have a different set of media to do it with. So there's more of everything, right? But there's been people who have been doing this for a long time. And I think one of the things that's different, like, okay, so Robert Anton Wilson was part of a group of people that I would say was sort of on the border between the first and the second generation, but maybe just the second generation of people who thought they were a counterculture, but didn't recognize that they were basically being used to mind control to a larger group of people. Right? They didn't understand, like, there's obviously, right, the first wave would really have been, like in the 60s, and Robert Anton Wilson's time was really more in the 70s, right? And
70s and 80s.
70s and 80s, right? So the first wave, like, I think in each wave, there are a couple of people that have some idea that there's something nefarious afoot going on in this. But most of the people, and in fact, most of the people that are really the magnets for the public to attract the public, they're actually just asking genuine questions. They really are curious. They find all this stuff fascinating. They think they're, creating a new conversation, and they're mostly oblivious, I think, until very late in the game, to the fact that a lot of their stuff is being steered, right? Mm-hmm. Like, when you listen to someone like Robert Anton Wilson, or someone like Terence McKenna even, right? Like, there's something very likable about these people, and they just don't have that same stench as someone who is obviously intentionally involved in an operation they know is designed to lead you astray, right? I think at a certain point, some of these people may start to have suspicion that that's going on, and they maybe don't do a thing about it that maybe you or I might think they should, or maybe they don't know what to do about it. And also in Anton Wilson's time and Terence McKenna's time, like a little different with the internet wasn't what it was then as it is now. You can't quite get an answer on something at the speed we could, right? It required going to the library, required conducting interviews and doing all this kind of stuff. So it really is more up to like your personal discernment about these people. And I think both things, what you're saying is absolutely true. We have to really monitor, like, do I agree with this? And do I disagree? And even when we find ourselves wholly disagreeing with something, we can't let that color us into this place. And this is something I think a lot of people who like alternative information do, is they want to throw everything this person set out once they find out that that person liked Aleister Crowley, or that once that person, they found out that that person was involved with this person or said this about that. And like, we're into this place. We've moved from like this time that you and I were talking about so much consumption of information. That was the age of information. And now we're into the age of discernment. And it isn't just discernment about this person good, this person bad, blah, blah, blah. This is true, this is false. It's about really being nuanced and like, okay, like this thing that they say, I don't agree with this. And I think this is wrong. But this other thing is right. And so this is a person who's like, you can't be so like one-minded about a person. You know what I mean? Because even like people who spout a lot of bullshit say some things that are true and that get your mind. Like I've talked about this before with many other people. Like the Alex Jones exercise is important, right? That like to, a lot of things he says is true, and then he starts to wind you into this space of like where the bullshit is bigger than the truth. But learning to discern, you have to go through that to start to learn how to discern things. Right. And that goes for all of these people, that there are questions about whether they were intelligence agents. Did they know they were? Did they not? Were they on the take? Did they do it on purpose? Were they stuck and didn't do the right thing? Blah, blah, blah. All that kind of stuff. Like we have to be really fine-toothed with our comb and like separating whether what a piece of information is good from whether we like the source it came from or not, and whether all the pieces of information they gave were ever good or not. Like it's very, like, it's important we also all develop our own filter for stuff, right? Because information that may be useful and beneficial to me might not be for you. And that doesn't mean that you're bad or I'm good or vice versa or anything like that. There should be some things that we can objectively look at and say, okay, I see what this is, right? But like not everything is that way. And what we choose to do with that information may be different, and that's okay. But I think that like this, discernment is really where it's at now, as opposed to knowing everything. I don't think there's that many more things for us to know. It's just discerning the value of what we know and what we should do with what we know.
Well, I mean, the discernment point, you're spot on, like, and particularly tying that into the CIA quote is because we know now that like, or I'm going to put, and this is like, this is the obvious thing. Like, it's easy for you and I to go, and we're talking about like, McKenna was, he stated that he was a PR agent of the CIA, and, Robert Anton Wilson was a big follower of the Thelema and like OTO and all that sort of stuff. And they're involved with these organizations. And then, you and I both talk in our series here is like, we both grew up in those scenarios too, and it's like, are we part of that? Like, I don't think I am, but that's part of like the discernment, like both of the information, but then also like, we got to reflect upon ourselves, or at least I try to do that. Like, not to the point where you go crazy, because that's a dangerous line to, you have to be realistic with yourself. But then you don't want to get all paranoid and nuts, but it is, this is like the time of just it's total chaos right now in terms of like the lack of structure. And so the discernment is what is going to and the ability to remain emotionally unattached, and to be able to pull out, like, into the baby from the bathwater, is, with the information, because it's definitely, it's it's really exciting right now. I'm finding it exciting but recognizing, like, this is part of, like, how it's always been. We've been, like, all of this craziness, like, going back to what you're saying with, like, the Robert Anton Wilson and the Terence McKenna, and where we are now, and the everything is, which we believe is lies. And then we go and we look at what is being put out, to as a mainstream narrative, and how ridiculous all of those stories are. The ridiculousness being how in a week it contradicts itself. And a
week of shit, like an hour now.
right. And like, okay, what's going on? Because I think that's what we're ultimately, you and I are thinking about. And hopefully, like, the people who are watching this is, like, it's not just that we're watching the big show with our popcorn. It's like, we're players in the big show with the popcorn. And how are we going to go through this time?
Yeah, I think this situation we find ourselves in is what Anton Wilson referred to as chapel perilous, where you're both, like, marveling at the specter, and you're part of it, and you don't know where the line between what you're observing and what you're doing is. And I think that's what he means by chapel perilous, right? Because he uses that term a lot, and apparently he popularized it. But according to Steve Crimi, who knows a lot about literary history, this was something from way, way back that had a similar meaning, but also something else. But I think it's that thing. It's that, like, trying to navigate the relationship between being the observer and the observed, and sometimes they're the same thing.
And this goes back to what we were talking about before, of, like, when you find these, like, wormholes and the weird stuff happens, and you're dancing in the financial district, and, like, because we're, like, it's all of this stuff, like, why it's folding in, like, more than any other piece of literature I've ever read was Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, and reading it, and then literally seeing that, like, the most concrete synchronicity appear, like, momentarily later. Like, I don't know what sort of coding that language is, but there's something in that which is, things get a little bit it changes the experience, and you become very, very aware of, like, am I the observed, or am I the observer? What's the difference? And that's that is an interesting part of it.
Another good example of that is when somebody listens to a video where Terence McKenna describes his DMT trip, and then that becomes, those characters show up in theirs, right?
Wow.
Are they showing up there because he's describing accurately a place that really exists, right? Or is it in yours because he said it? And is there a difference? Does it matter? Right? Like, that's a lot of like, you have to, like, that's a lot. It's like when you look at the sculpture that looks like an elephant from one side and a bunny from the other, and whatever, right? And both things are true, right? And so it's like, okay, like, which to me just I like that. Like, it makes it more interesting that something can be both this and that. I don't need it to be this or that,
I mean, that is what you just described. That's a lot of what, like, some of Robert Anton Wilson's other work is, like, literally, I think it's in quantum psychology, where he does a lot of I don't know what they're called, the optical illusions, where you can see what, it's like the two faces kissing, or it's a goblet, or a goblet, but the ability to, like, hold that image, like, to be able to see them both simultaneously, and, like, what's happening with consciousness. But then, it's not, that's an exercise for actually life, of being able to discern, like, what is our Truman Show experience that we're having.
I think that was one of the main things that they used in, like, when they would do testing in classrooms for part of Project Talent to decide who was going to be their people that they've used and whatnot. And I think they were mostly interested in people that could see both.
And hold both.
And hold both, and actually let there be interactive play between both, right? Like, I think because that's where the super interesting part of it is.
Yes.
Actually how intelligence works. And I say intelligence, I don't mean, how smart you are, although that's part of it, but, like, intelligence in terms of how intelligence agencies put together narratives, how they decide what things are important, what things are not, is in that space where it's not so certain what is and what isn't.
Right. Twilight.
Yeah, Twilight language is a great way
Twilight,
to
like, but the actual Twilight, like, you know, that strange time, like when you are, whether it's like dawn or dusk, and if you're actually pay attention to like what the natural world does for that like 35 minutes, there are things that happen that don't happen any other time during the day.
Yeah, that dawn and dusk, absolutely, yeah. Have you seen this? Have you seen the show? It's a couple years old, but we're watching it now because I never finished what was on. It's called Legion.
No, but it sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's super. This show actually goes along really well with what we're doing here. So I would advise people who are enjoying this series, and yourself included, to maybe take a look at this, even if you don't watch the whole series, just because to understand that what you just described, like the whole experience of this show is kind of that. It's the experience of that crossover between consciousness and unconsciousness, morning and like night and day, the dusk, the dawn, like that same, like it's that very interesting space where there's a lot of room to play.
Well, yeah, like when you said, I never thought about what you said. Like I do this a lot. Like I try to hold, and it's interesting because the definition of cognitive dissonance is like holding two contradictory ideas simultaneously. But and cognitive dissonance is often identified as like, you know, something you want to avoid. Like, you know, that's an indication of like, you know, improper use of mental faculties. But the opposite is true too. The ability to hold the contradictory ideas at the same time is like the higher level of like consciousness. And the difference is being able to aware with it. So I think about that, and I always like any type of exercise I can do, like whether it's physical, whether it's mental, if I can combine the two of like doing like these things simultaneously. But what I've never done, or what I don't do, is what you said earlier, which is that, and then make them play together. And I'm like, oh, you know, I still kept them separate. Like, you know, I kept them hermetically sealed. And like, now it's like, well, what would that be? Like, what is that sort of dance all about? Of like, once you've established that ability to be able to hold these different ideas or visuals, that, because it's one and the same. If you can do it visually, you can do it mentally. If you can do it mentally, you can do it visually, and they're gonna feed off of each other. Like, maybe that's like, you know, I'm interested in exploring that within my own sort of practice of like, all right, well, what does play look like?
Yeah, what is play? And I think this is important because I think we're getting to this place where there's no longer any separation between quote unquote real life and YouTube videos, right? Or like, drills and reality is another way to put it, right? Yeah. So like, I fully believe that what's happening and why things are so crazy right now is like due to so we had a really interesting conversation at Conspiracy Cocktail last time. And it was funny because I almost thought, I should see if Michael wants to come. And I just got busy and I was like, but I also kind of like that we're not doing too much interacting other than when we do this. But somebody came and dropped this idea of time acupuncture, right? Okay. And what the idea is that like how he described it, and I'm going to do a show. I just had recorded a show a few weeks ago with this guy and it just came out. I'm going to do a secondary show to talk about this because this came after the show. Okay. But the idea is that like, okay, the way he framed it was like, let's say that there was like a person who traveled, a time traveler who came, like, let's say it's John Teeter because the profile he gave seemed to match John Teeter, who came and alerted certain aspects of intelligence agencies or military or some controlling faction to that there was a lot of these really horrific events that were going to be coming. And one of the ways they chose to deal with it, and he was saying it this way, but it could also work the other way where they could use it to do worse things. Right. But he was like, you know, he was playing the position of like, well, what if it's actually to kind of help us? So what if they found out that there was going to be all these horrific events, right? And a way to stop them from happening was to create like a fake one that mimicked what was going to happen just a little before it was supposed to happen, to release all that pressure from the system. Just like acupuncture is to start getting things flowing again, like to unclog blockage.
Yes.
Right. So like, what if they created this, and he was using it, we were talking a little bit about the George Floyd thing, right? Like there's a lot of things about this that look very fake and bizarre, and we've been noticing this increasingly in the things that have happened, over the last several years. It really seemed to start with 9/11, and everything has looked increasingly fake since then. Before, something seemed more organic about these things. That like maybe like there, in whatever reality he came from, there was this horrific event that, where a black man did get killed, and that started like just absolutely out of control, violent racial civil war and whatever. Yeah. So instead, they do this thing that allows there to be this steam valve of this kind of weird thing like that.
Right.
Like they're breaking and looting and stealing Nikes and creating chaos and noise that's different. And there's some, it's acting as a steam valve for some pent up emotions for a lot of people that are there, but it like released it before this horrific thing could have happened. Right. And on with a lot of these events. And so it just gave way to like this really kind of interesting conversation that then got me thinking, because of some stuff that has happened for me over the last several weeks and in the last few months, really. And Randy and I just did kind of our last show together, and it was talking about this sort of bleed over between reality and this content that we've created and that has been created about us and whatever, and how there is no, it seems like there's no barrier anymore, right? And I described an experience I had where literally I looked at the night sky outside and then came inside and watched the video Randy sent me, and on the video was exactly the same thing in the sky that I had just been looking at out there. And the video was from years before, right? So it was like, what is going on? It wasn't like he sent me a video of my own sky, right? Like it was bizarre. So I'm starting to develop a theory or an idea that I'm calling timeline grafting, right? Where you can take anything, and there's no hierarchy here. You can take it from a movie, a YouTube video, real life video from another reality that's different than ours in a parallel dimension, all kind of stuff, and splice it together, edit it together like a video, and that makes up our reality, right? Where it's just pitting, like it's like creating a collage or a storyboard, right? But there's no explanation that some of this stuff is from real life and some isn't, and it's to the point where it doesn't matter anymore, because we are so involved with our media and our content and our digital creations and whatever, that it is part of us and our reality, to the point that there is not a separation anymore. There is not a difference in a lot of ways, right? And that's part of how, I have a lot of other theories that what's going on. The whole world has changed since we spoke 2 weeks ago, because the chaos broke out after that, the new level of chaos, right?
Right.
And how I see what's going on right now is really largely a digital phenomenon, an algorithmic phenomenon. Like we're starting to see people behave as if characters in a video game or a role-playing game or something like that, largely, right? And I think that this is evidence of the fact that there is ceasing to be any barrier between those things.
You just said a whole bunch of stuff, which it's going to take me a while to unpack that, but there's a bunch I want to comment on. One thing, remind me this when we go into the second hour. Okay. About like the story which you told about like looking at the thing in your hand and then you saw up in the sky the same thing. I've got a I've got a wild story to tell you about, which just happened like 4 days ago, very tangible. So in the second hour, I'm going to go and tell you that story, but I need to go and get it. So that's what I'm saying in the second hour. So remind me to do that.
Okay.
Well, the first thing is like, one is like, I don't know how reality is. So like so I'm not claiming to understand like what I know anything, but that makes a lot of sense to me when you talk about having the capability to like utilize valve release in terms of However, the unfolding of life is managed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's part of me when we talk like this, which is, well, there's one way of life where like you're kind of like hands off, grounded in just like the most in your face material reality, and you're not trying to manipulate anything and you just let it unfold. But maybe we've never even been part of that. You know, there's never been a moment in our lives we've had that experience. So maybe that's not even like an actual thing to say is on the table. It's like, yeah, that sounds great, but have you ever seen that? So maybe that's not possible. But that being said, like that makes sense to me. And when you're saying that, there's a quote which I go back to a lot. And this goes back, and this is like another example of like the CIA thing. Like, you know, we don't know what's real or what's not. So was Einstein like, you know, was he the plagiarist person who we all hear is, or we've read about conspiratorial, or was he like the genius we're told about in school, or is he like some combination, or was he just like a made up figure which was given to us in the theater of books? But anyway,
all of it.
The quote, which I think is, for me personally, which is very, very helpful in these times, like in a scenario like what you said, is the most important question you can ask yourself is the universe a friendly or a dangerous place?
Mm-hmm.
And from that perspective, then we begin, like, to what you're saying, like, you know, can we do this like time acupuncture, or whether the valve release and like purposeful artificial events to kind of like soften, to flatten the curve. Like that's the whole thing of what flatten the curve is all about. Like we're flattening let's just not make it too intense. That would make sense. Like if that ability was around, and if it was like a friendly environment, like what would you do? Or if you're creating the Truman Show experience that you and me, and like, you know, whether they're actual people or just like bots that are responding to us, who knows? Like you could be a bot, I could be a bot. But like ultimately, like from your perspective, my perspective, is it friendly? Am I paranoid? Do I think that this is an enjoyable ride? What am I seeing in this image? Am I seeing the two faces kissing, or am I seeing the goblet? I always go back to being very positive. I like to think it's a very...
So what you just said goes to something that I want to talk about in the second hour. So we have your thing that we're going to talk about in the second hour, and my thing that we're going to talk about in the second hour. But I want to say it's interesting. A favorite quote of mine is also Albert Einstein. I have all the same questions you have about Albert Einstein. And also one of my favorite quotes is a quote from Albert Einstein that I think totally sums up where we're at right now. And it kind of matches the Chapel Perilous thing. And that is, the horizon is just an imaginary line in the distance that recedes as you approach it.
The horizon is just...
Right? Like, and so like maybe he was just like a quote generator or a meme generator, and all the rest of the shit was a bunch of, you know, whatever to go around it.
Yes.
Has great quotes, but it's like, you know, like it's a similar kind of thing, right? So, but yes, what you said, is it a friendly place or is it a dangerous place? And that actually, I can't wait. I love that synchronizes with what I want to talk about some. I want to circle back in this. So two things, that time acupuncture thing, like the way I think about it, like is imagine like the difference between like losing a leg and just having an infection that takes a while to heal is how quickly you lance the abscess, right? If you get in there and release the pressure and allow it to, you know, like to do what it needs to do, right? You can save the leg, right? But if it's allowed to swell beyond a certain point and get gangrene and all that kind of stuff, then you lose it. Right. So that's an interesting question. Like, I mean, I think that's kind of, it works in sort of that same way, right? Really the valve release kind of thing. Right. And I think that like, that is an interesting technique to think about as we go forward with what we want to sort of create. I want to circle back to where we started a little bit, which was about reading books and getting back to reading tangible things and articles real fast. Because one of the things I wanted to talk about is I watched a video of Quantum of Conscience. It came up in my feed the other, and I know that he looks at your videos sometimes. I know in the past he's looked at mine, and I think he's kind of an interesting guy and an interesting thinker who asks interesting questions. And I don't watch too much stuff of his for the reason that I explained earlier, but I decided I needed to watch a little bit of this video. So I didn't watch the whole thing. I only watched a little bit. But he basically was referring to having watched somebody else's video and asking this question, okay, so we're here in this situation and we're all trying to do what we're trying to do, but there's these people around us, whatever people like to refer to them as, like NPCs or order followers or asleep or bots or whatever. And what do we do with them? What do we do about them? And what he was talking about in the portion of the video I watched was that he has never had the situation where somebody comes up to him and says, look, Matt, I disagree with you about this stuff. You're never going to win me over to your way of seeing things, but I want to understand you. Let's have a conversation about that, right? For many, many years, that was my same experience. Like, I remember specifically, like, begging my father, like, let's take one day, right? And let's just pick one topic and let's look at it together and agree on, like, what the evidence means, and then if you think there's a different solution or summary to be made, assumption to be made because of it, then I do, that's fine. But let's, like, make sure we're looking at the same picture, right? Let's do that one time. And he wouldn't do it. So, like, and that was my experience over and over with people until, like, the last couple of years. And what I have a lot of, like, variety of worlds that I kind of am interested in and that I kind of dabble around in. And I'll say little things here and there to people. And sometimes people will come back and be like, you know, that thing you said 5 years ago, like, I got you were a little crazy, but I remembered it. And I have a question now. And then it leads to a conversation. But more importantly, in this, like, a recent period of time with all this chaos going on, I have found that there are a few people who are actually willing to have the conversation. But they respond better to having the conversation when you give them material and time for them to sort of chew on it before the conversation, and it's written material. Or if it's going to be, like, some sort of visual or digital material, it's not podcasts, right? Or brief video clips. It might be like a long documentary that is kind of like reading a long book, right? So that they kind of have something to chew on and sit with for a little bit. We've gotten really into this thing of, like, sharing little clips with people or, like, podcasts. The people who think we're conspiracy theorists, like, that is, even though that term was seeded, like, after the JFK thing, it really exploded as podcasts and social media and YouTube and stuff exploded because, oh, here was a place where the conspiracy theorists could finally talk because no real newspaper or publisher or whatever, take that seriously. So people associate newer forms of media with being like places where conspiracy theorists or whatever, like, put their information. Whereas when you give people written things, books, articles, you know what I mean? Especially articles that are sort of, when I say balanced in nature, what I mean is just like it has the points in there that you want to kind of get across, but that don't make vast assumptions based on those things to look at. And I've had a few people, like, be willing to have those conversations. So one of the things that we do with I understand, like, there's a lot of people that there's, like, not a point. They're not going to wake up. I don't try and wake people up, right? But I have noticed that on the rare occasion that there is somebody willing to have a conversation, and the written articles, the written media seem to have, like, a greater effect at facilitating a meaningful conversation than the digital stuff. And so because you brought that up about books and whatnot, and I had wanted to talk about Matt a little bit, Matt, that's his name, Matt from Quantum Conscious, a little bit. I thought that was, like, kind of a place to sort of wrap it in. I didn't do the whole video of his because of what we talked about earlier, and also just sort of time constraints. I would like to hear the rest of the video because I don't know where he was going with it. But I do understand that. Do you find for yourself that, like, you get a more holistic understanding of the information, or like it leads to, like, a better thought-provoking written information than just consuming it through the box?
You mean for my own inner world, or trying to share something with someone else?
So I'm just noticing it now about sharing it with other people. So what I'm
Right.
asking you is about your own inner.
Definitely, because to me, because particularly understanding people. I like to ground a lot of it in just at least an astrological perspective. So Mercury, understanding someone's Mercury, how they understand information, just right away, like if you've got like Mercury in an earth sign, like you're much more tangible, and like actually holding something is going to be more material, and it's going to sink in. I don't have a Mercury in earth sign personally, but that being said, like I definitely need to hold things. Like, I want to hold the piece of paper. I want to spend some time. I would like that. One of the best things I like about going back to reading something I've read before is to see what I highlighted.
Yeah.
I'm like, why was that important to me? Because I would highlight this line. I wouldn't highlight that line.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting is, and the reason I'm bringing that up is, you're talking about like the grounding of the information with inside. And it's like, when you highlight something, when you write, or when you take notes, like even if you don't even look at those notes before, like, that's a ritual where you're physically putting something deeper in your consciousness. I mean, without a doubt are books and like physical. Like if you don't have a book, like printed out article is better than reading it on the computer. Definitely.
I find that also the written material doesn't also come with an algorithm, right? Like it doesn't, right? And it also doesn't come, like sometimes with like listening to podcasts or videos, there may be something that you find that you don't like about the way the person looks or the person talks, and that becomes a reason to dismiss them or whatever, right? Like a lot of people don't like the way I talk. They think I talk too fast, or whatever, right? And so when something is written, I mean, obviously right now the way we communicate largely is we send people articles on our computers and phone, but even within that, like that's still different than all of the stuff that's going into a full presentation of digital media. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I agree. I always like it best when I can sort of read it in the book or like have the printed out article and whatnot. But like I thought maybe I was going to talk about that, but then when you said what you were saying about books, and I feel like it's so, there's just something different to just sitting with an idea and almost disregarding the person that is bringing that idea to you, right? Like, you know what I mean? That makes the information like, you can just chew on the words that are being said, and you don't have to accept all this other stuff. And it kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier about discernment too, and weeding out, like, is the information good regardless of whether you like or trust the person or whatever. So I should get back and watch some more of that. I don't know if do you ever watch Matt's videos, The Quantum of Conscience?
I've only seen parts of them. I mean, like you said, like I really stopped consuming any sort of media right now. I read a couple articles maybe a week, and that's about it. I like to, and I'm even more interested. I'm more interested in the mainstream narrative than the analysis, because I mean, by now, like any of us who've been in this game for a while, like we all know, we're like, whatever. What we're interested in is like what is being fed to the masses. What is the storyline which they're putting out there? And like, you can make an argument like, well, don't even read it, but I'm still like.
That's something that also has happened to me during that same period of time where I started consuming less, as I started looking more at the mainstream, or at like the very slight alternative where it's like mainstream alternative kind of thing. Yeah. Like I think that like a lot of that's kind of interesting to see how those narratives play out. Like a lot of time I'll just even like read the front page of the Drudge Report. I won't read
that's all I do.
I'll just read the front page.
Yeah. That's what I do. That I think that I get a really good snapshot of what's going on in the mainstream world by like just reading the front page of the Drudge Report, Daily Mail UK, and my local newspaper's website.
Yeah.
So I get I get to see the reflection locally, I get to see it nationally, and I get to see it like an international reflection back on the United States.
Yeah, I actually feel like I have yet to have a situation where the thing that I intuited from looking at just the headlines about it on the front page, like didn't accurately match what was being said or the way the things were being woven together. So, yeah. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of do in this first segment?
I don't know. I know we talked about Robert Anton Wilson last time. I'm going to bring up one other book, which I've been reading side by side with this with Prometheus Rising, and I found it very, very, very powerful for me in terms of discerning ideas, because they are two people who are talking about the exact same people, the exact same stuff, and they both have brilliant analysis in a certain perspective. And they both, like, you know, like, I guess like anyone, you say the same thing about me or you, I suppose. Maybe they won't say we're brilliant, but maybe they will. Who knows? But there are holes in all of their perspectives, and seeing it side by side. And it's Michael Hoffman's Psychological Warfare and Secret Societies. Have you ever read that?
I've never read it, but Michael Hoffman has come up over and over during the years of doing shows about mind control and shows about all this kind of stuff. I need to go take a look at some of his books. Yeah.
If you read, and like, you know, it's so interesting because he and Anton Wilson are diametrically opposed in terms of like their judgment. Like, you know, this is good and this is bad. And they both, you know, well, I mean, I agree with each of them in different areas, but it is so fascinating to see how ideas can be sliced and diced, and how easy it is to go to get like caught up in the presentation of someone who's got like some really brilliant ideas, and to not want to necessarily accept everything which they say. You know, Michael J. Hoffman is not right for everyone, and particularly someone. But if you're able to separate, like, you know, your own personal opinions with other opinions, that might be a really interesting read. But where he's genius is being able to explain the mass psychodramas which are played out with Twilight language and how it's done. And if you find that interesting, like, it's a great book.
Yeah, I'll have to read that. I'm not sure, like, I'm not sure what his background is, but like when you said what you just said about him, it also makes me think of like, there's some people out there who have some really good breakdowns of some of the esoterics. They do it from a position of like having a particular religious belief that may not resonate with me, but there's some really important things that they're saying that are definitely true and valuable. And so that ability to be able to separate that you may have a disagreement with their perspective on the world in general from their ability to bring forward information or ways of viewing information that can be, you know, important in your understanding the overall picture. I think that's also a critical, you know, like it's an important skill to sort of work on in yourself. You know, like there's people that people refer me to in the alternative media, like, oh, they want me to look at their videos or they want me to have my show or whatever. And there's something about people that are just a no for me, right? Like just a no. That, you know, I'm sure I'm a no for a lot of people, but I still try and take enough of a look to see sometimes if enough people, like, is there something here that I need to pay attention to, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I overall I'm not into, you know, the whole vibe. And oftentimes there is, even if it's just one thing, you know what I mean? And so like that what you're talking about someone not being for everybody, like I think a lot of times, even, you know, like even when we decide someone's not for us, like it's still a good idea sometimes to like take the peep out of the corner of your eye once in a while and sort of see what's going on over there. Because I don't know about you, but like some of the people that I don't care for the most have sometimes given the little nugget, right? The little nugget that makes things that like I couldn't quite put together from sources that I do prefer make sense, right? Yeah.
that's the paradox, it seems, of like life, right? You know, it's like the person who pulls it all together, or the whatever, like where it comes from is what you're like least interested or most repulsed by, pushed away, and like, well, you know, that's really where the gold is found.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I think let's kind of wrap up the first segment here. So this is the public segment. So tell people where they can find you and what you're up to.
You could go to susquehannaalchemy.com, and what I've been doing a lot of lately are like, what I'm good at is I'm a storyteller, and I like to use astrology, and like I use it as a point of reference. You know, I find it to be like a really good point of reference, but regardless. And what I've been doing with people really over the last 60 days is I'm calling them the Starboard Light Ceremony. I used to do this really big, beautiful, like astrological storytelling. But now what I'm doing is I have people fill out a questionnaire, and I'm asking them all these questions about their life. And then they give me their birth information, and then we have an hour talk. And the point of it is, like, it's my opinion that what we're doing right now, this worldwide initiation, as we come out the other side, like, we're to step into something new, regardless of what the outer world is going to be. And this is to assist people in that time. So it's like, I'm giving another view of your story, and I'm doing it based upon your astrology, upon like the information you're giving me about your life history, and then what's happening in your life right now. And if you're looking for, if you had that sense of like, okay, what's going on right now, and where am I going, like on a personal level, you can go and book those sessions with me online, and also put out some neat, really unique guided meditations. I call them art journeys, which you can find on my website. And YouTube, Susquehanna Alchemy is the channel. I've been putting out like maybe about like a video or two a week lately. And so I cover a lot of research. Like, you know, we're talking ideas, but I've been going into half my videos about research, and then the other half are ideas really grounded in looking at the natural world in a different way, and particularly the nature of flowing water and rivers. And so you can find out that information on susquehannaalchemy.com. Instagram, I don't do anything on Facebook. I think I got an account there, but I can't stand that. And you could go to Susquehanna Alchemy also on Instagram. And if you want to just go and support my work, you could go to subscribestar.com, and that's also Susquehanna Alchemy.
All right, awesome. We are going to move over into the patrons segment. We're going to talk about what Michael wanted to, about that sort of rollover between reality and the thing.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it.
And what I wanted to kind of get into, and you brought it up in that idea of, is the world a beautiful, safe, a dangerous, what was the exact quote? The world.
The most important question you can ask is the universe a dangerous or a safe place?
Right. And it goes to like,
friendly place, not safe.
Are we going to play, or kind of like, how are you going to view what you're in? And I kind of want to talk about, we got a lot of interesting response last week from people who, you know, were relating to what we were talking about identifying whether or not you were sort of in projects or whatnot. But what I want to kind of talk about a little bit is, for people who consider themselves to be targeted individuals, how to reframe that experience from one of something that is happening to you to something that you can play with and you can kind of turn into, like, you become the sort of artist of that reality,
yes,
as opposed to just being like the marionette on the strings kind of thing, right? So we're going to talk about some of that in the second hour too. So join us, patreon.com/offplanetmedia. We'll see you on the other side.